Notre Dame fans, welcome to a special edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. We are not going to talk right now about our upon further review. We've got some other stuff we want to talk about. It has been a wild day of college football. And, of course, Billy Napier is the new head coach at Florida. The Duke job just came open. And it appears that Lincoln Riley is taking the head coaching job at Oklahoma. It's not even, or a USC. It's not even that it appears. It looks like it's a done deal, and even to the point where it's been announced that, or it's been reported that Bob Stoops is going to coach Oklahoma in a bowl game. So it is happening. Lincoln Riley is leaving Oklahoma to USC, and my first reaction was, "Huh? What?"
Yeah, it's a good response.
And I think there's a lot to this, and that's what we wanted to talk about. I just wanted to kind of get it out. We're going to have some opinions. The people in our chat are going to have some opinions. And, of course, the reason that we're doing this and not like doing a Billy Napier to Florida show is because this obviously has a greater impact on Notre Dame, because Notre Dame's obviously the biggest rival, and
every year.
What happens with USC impacts Notre Dame negatively and positively. So we're going to talk about that as well, and then we'll have a little bit of a recruiting slant on it also. So, Vince, first of all, did you know about this before I texted you and asked you if you want to do a show? I know you were out on the road kind of driving. It kind of came out of nowhere.
No, I knew nothing. And you're like, hey, you want to do a show like right now? I'm like, why? Like, why are we doing a show early? And then you told me, I was like, you got to be kidding me. Did not see this one coming in any way. Very surprising. We've talked a lot about the fact that USC wanted to make a splash. They wanted a big name. Well, mission accomplished.
They were getting passed up by Dave Aranda, turned them down.
Yeah.
There was talk that Matt Campbell might turn them down. They were having the same problems that they've always had whenever they're going to head coach. And then this happens, and this is about as good of a hire as I think USC could have made this offseason in many ways.
Absolutely.
In many, many ways. So, look, I don't know what the money they're throwing at him. It's going to be significant because he makes pretty decent money at Oklahoma. Not necessarily SEC money, but he makes pretty good money at Oklahoma.
Sure.
And, I don't think this is necessarily just a money move. I mean, I've been reading stories all year. John Hoover, who covers Oklahoma for SI, had a story out today talking about this hire, and he reiterated that there's just been something missing with Oklahoma all season. And there's a lot going on here. I mean, when you look at Lincoln Riley, obviously he has had a lot of success, obviously in a short period of time at Oklahoma. He's had four straight Big 12 championships. He took over in 2017. After Bob Stoops retired. He was their offensive coordinator prior to that. So when Oklahoma made the college football playoff in 2015, Bob Stoops was the head coach. Lincoln Riley was their offensive coordinator. Took over in 2017. He had 3 straight 12-2 seasons. Then last year they went 9-2. His first 3 years, they made the college football playoff each season. Lost in overtime to Georgia the first year. Got beat by 11 by Bama in a game that wasn't super convincing. And then in 2019, just got absolutely destroyed by LSU.
Right.
Last year had a strange year. Last year, went 9-2, but you kind of chalk it up to COVID. You and I have talked a lot about. I'm not putting a lot of stock into what happened last year. But you start the season 1-2, and then you finish the season off with 8 straight wins. They won the Big 12 championship again for the 4th straight time, and then crushed Florida in a bowl game. Super high expectations for the Sooners coming into the season. I was one of the people that had that. I really thought this was going to be a year that Oklahoma could go compete for a title. I really did. I liked the talent they had coming back on offense. Their defense had been improving. Their schedule was super favorable. and it just didn't pan out. They were just never that team. Even in wins, they weren't a super impressive team, and they just never looked like I thought that they would look. And disappointed. Had a chance to reserve a spot in the Big 12 title game last night and couldn't get it done and
Right.
lost to Oklahoma State.
They laid an egg last night.
They
There's
did.
no question about
They
it.
did.
They had every opportunity to be in the Big 12 championship, and
Yeah.
they just absolutely laid an egg, a la Wisconsin. I mean, that was just
Yeah.
those two games, I think, were the most disappointing to me from this past weekend. And I know we're focused on Oklahoma, but it's the same situation. They win the game, they're in the Big 10 championship. Wisconsin wins the game, they're in the Big 10 championship. Right. It's just disappointing on both ends.
So you look at Oklahoma and you say, okay, there's all these rumblings last week that Riley's going to take the LSU job. And last night he says, I'm not going to be the next head coach at LSU. And the ESPN article says he remains committed to Oklahoma. I couldn't find a comment where he actually said that.
Right.
Because I was going to say, like, how do you say that last night and then say that then leave the next day? But you can't actually, and I couldn't, and I've been trying to find article after article about his post-game comments last night, and in none of them can I find him saying, I'm staying at Oklahoma or I'm committed to Oklahoma. It was just, I'm not going to be the head coach there. So, Vince, it was some really cryptic stuff. It was a really interesting conversation.
Well, and it's not like they reached out this morning and that he accepted to this afternoon, right? I mean, this is something that
I'd be shocked if that happened
in the works for at least a couple days. I mean, I don't want to speculate, but it's rare that, he would get a phone call the day after he blew it in the Big 12 with an opportunity to go to the Big 12 championship. And they're like, you know what? That's our guy. And, let's call him up and get him. This had to have been in the works for a few days.
I would think so, but part of me wonders because it was like 2-3 days ago that the reports were that it looked like Matt Campbell was going to be the guy. So did they get turned down by Matt Campbell and said, Lincoln Riley's listening to LSU, let's give our shot. And it worked? I don't know. That's what's going to be really fascinating to see that come out. And we're not going to, I think you all know us well enough to know that we're not going to say things as if they're true if we don't know. And so we don't know. So what we're sharing with you is our opinion. And when it's something that we know for a fact, we'll report it. But
absolutely.
It just the timing of it, the manner in which it went down, the school that he picked is also kind of interesting. And there's the first thought that people have is he's afraid of going to the SEC because Oklahoma is obviously going to be leaving the Big 12 for the SEC. And there was talks about him taking over at LSU. He turned that job down. That also would have got him in the SEC. And he's taking the job. He's taking the job at USC. What makes this fascinating for me, Vince, is I'd be surprised if he was afraid of coaching in the SEC. I think this has a little bit to do with something else. I think what did we talk about this summer when it was reported that Texas and Oklahoma were leaving for the SEC? I said, I'm really curious how the head coaches at those schools, what the head coaches of those schools think about this.
Sure.
The thing you have to remember about Lincoln Riley is he's a Big 12 guy through and through. Lincoln Riley's from Lubbock, Texas. He was born in Lubbock, Texas. He played quarterback at Texas Tech. The first 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years of his career were at Texas Tech. He spent 5 seasons at East Carolina coaching for a guy who previously coached with at Texas Tech, right? And for the life of me, I cannot remember his name. You know who I'm talking about? He was the defensive coordinator at Texas Tech back in why am I drawing a blank on his name? This is going to really bother me. Sorry, folks. I'm going to look it up right now. He was the D coordinator at Texas Tech. Ruffin McNeil. That's who the head coach was. That's who Lincoln Riley worked with at East Carolina. Well, Ruffin McNeil was at Texas Tech as a defensive coordinator when Lincoln Riley was at Texas Tech. That's how he got to East Carolina. And then what does he do? He comes back to Oklahoma, back to the Big 12. And so you look at it, Vince, and you say, this is a Texas guy that's Big 12 through and through. And the school he is at just left to go to the SEC. And it doesn't appear that Lincoln Riley had any say in the matter.
Right.
Not that he necessarily should have or any other school would care. I doubt that if Notre Dame was ready to join the ACC because Jack Swarbrick and the Board of Trustees wanted it, that they'd really care much what Brian Kelly thought about it. I think they should. I think they should absolutely care about, and especially a guy like Lincoln Riley who's young. Brian Kelly's a different story. Brian Kelly's 60. He's kind of in the last few years of his, what people think is going to be his final contract. It'd make more sense then, even though I still think they should ask his opinion. For Lincoln Riley, this is a 38-year-old guy that you could potentially see being here for a long time. To lose him to a program like USC tells me that he just wanted out of Oklahoma.
Right.
That's what it boiled down to. I think it was more that than it was him not wanting the SEC smoke. Because I wonder if he just felt betrayed by that. Like, you're going to take us. We're in a great situation here in the Big 12. We've got Texas. We've got this. We've got all of our rivals are here. And you're just going to abandon that for a money grab. He knows that Oklahoma's going to have a tougher time going to the SEC. Anybody would. You go to that league and that many teams in it, it's going to be a challenge. It's all about this. And I just feel like so we don't know what happened, but at the same time, we're relatively intelligent human beings that can, have some, deductive reasoning here, Vince, right?
Right.
Seems to love it at Oklahoma, tons of success. Oklahoma leaves the Big 12 for the SEC. Reports come out about how him and his team aren't connected. Clearly he's distracted, it would seem, right? And then all of a sudden he's looking at LSU. There's rumors about him going to the NFL, and then he bolts for USC. Like not even 24 hours after his team's regular season comes to a close, he's gone.
Yeah.
That's the sign of someone who wasn't afraid of the SEC. That's someone who wanted out of Oklahoma. Because here's the deal. There's no way Oklahoma is going to be in the SEC before 2023. Right. He could be super picky about whatever job he wants. There's going to be NFL jobs coming open. There's going to be jobs this year, jobs next year. The fact that he bolted for a USC right after the season tells me that he just wanted out of Oklahoma.
Exactly. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on all that, Vince?
No, I think that was the biggest red flag to me when Oklahoma and Texas decided to leave the Big 12 to go to the SEC, is that I don't think they consulted with any of the coaches. And again, that's speculation on my part. It just felt like it was a board decision or a president's decision. And it was, hey, this is what we think is best because we're going to be cashing some massive paychecks. And I think that the communication probably wasn't there. And if you're Lincoln Riley and you feel like you're, wherever you believe you land on the hierarchy of importance at Oklahoma, I think that took a shot. It took a beating. And that means something. Look, head coaches at football schools want to be consulted. They want to be a part of the decision-making process, and to pick up and move everybody over to the SEC, to a new conference with different points of emphasis. I'll just say that. Okay. That's a huge decision. And it just didn't feel like the consultation was there across the board. And I think that, for lack of a better term, I think it pissed him off. Now, there could be more involved than just that one decision, but that didn't help. I don't think it helped at all. And so I think that was, I'm not happy at Oklahoma. I think that there was disarray with the team this year, and I think that kind of starts at the top, because I don't know that Lincoln Riley was all that in. I don't think he was 100% in this year at Oklahoma, because I think he was pretty ticked off. And now that we see this I don't know that I would have come to this conclusion without today's news. But now that you have this information, we know that he's leaving less than 24 hours after his last game, where Oklahoma, frankly, looked disinterested in that game last night. That starts at the top, and you start to look back. You start to look back at everything else that's been going on this season. It just, I don't know. It kind of lines up for me that maybe he wasn't all in because he was starting to maybe have one eye elsewhere. So
yeah, I think I don't know if I'd say they looked disinterested, as they just looked discombobulated like they have all year. I mean, they look like a team that was just winning because they had better players than the teams they went against. And if you think about it, the two teams they played this year that you look at and say, well, that's a really well-coached football team. It's Baylor and Oklahoma State, and they lost
Sure.
both games. And the offense didn't play well in either game. I mean, they had some decent numbers last night, but they had 33 points last night, but their offense didn't score 33 points last night. They had a defensive touchdown, and they had a special teams that set up one. And so it was clearly that there was some sort of disconnect between him and Oklahoma. And now you want to say, look, once the season starts, you got to put all that behind you and coach and all that, but that's much easier said than done. When it's like with players, when you feel like your coach has betrayed you and you've lost that trust, it's hard to just commit to going out every day and doing the best that you can do. I don't think this is just a money move. If Lincoln Riley wanted to make a money move, he would have stayed in Oklahoma, or he would have taken the LSU job, or he would go to the NFL. I think this is he wanted out of Oklahoma, but he also wanted to land somewhere that made sense. And again, I've said I don't think LSU – I don't know how LSU would have fit in LSU. I don't know if that's necessarily a great move. I think going to USC is a good move for him, but it also is a move that further sets up an opportunity for him to leave for the NFL. That's what I think. So, I mean, we're going to see how all this plays out, Vince, but I don't think this was a money move. I don't think this was him being afraid of the SEC move.
Yeah.
I just think he wanted out. So
yeah, that's what it feels like to me as well. I look, he's a young, confident coach. Why would he be afraid of the SEC? Like, I don't see that being the case.
That's just fan talk to me. And of course, SEC fan talk, I mean, look, I think the SEC had a role in it, but I don't think it was about being afraid of the SEC. Number one is just using some common sense. How is my program where we recruit the Southwest and the West Coast and a little bit of the Southeast, how are we going to necessarily benefit greatly by jumping to the SEC and playing a gauntlet every week? You know what I mean? Like, to me, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. And we said so when they made the decision. It was 100%. It was a money move. Yeah. And I also think here's the other thing. It was a bad look for Oklahoma because it looked like Oklahoma was just being dragged by their by Texas to the SEC.
Right, exactly.
Whatever you say, Texas, we'll do whatever you want to do. And if I'm Lincoln Riley, I'm like, seriously?
Right, exactly.
So
and if you look at it from Lincoln Riley's perspective, like, who's Texas? You know what I mean? He understands what they are and everything, but like, they've owned Texas.
They've been relevant in 20 years.
Exactly. That's exactly my point. It's like, why are we following them when they should be following us? Like, that's the mentality that I would have if I was him. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I think he was ticked off. And if you go to USC, you got an opportunity to be the top dog in your conference. Right? I mean, you got Oregon, obviously, maybe UCLA. But, I mean, if USC gets big again, you are the top dog. Right. So that's the opportunity sitting in front of him at USC.
Right. And now what's going to be interesting now is, where does Oklahoma go? Yeah. Do they promote from within, which I think, honestly, as I look at their staff, there's not a lot of overwhelming options. Like, there's no Lincoln Riley for Lincoln Riley, right? Because when Bob Stoops left, it was clear you got this hotshot young offensive coordinator. And now all of a sudden it's like, well, he's out. So, man, I gotta tell you, I'm curious what they do next. And here's the other thing too: is Oklahoma, are they gonna? There's two options for Oklahoma. Number one is you make a reactionary hire, and you do something quick, right? It's hey, let's go hire, promote from within, or let's quickly go out and get a name because we have to. I've seen people talk about Matt Campbell, and because now all the rumors are going to fly out. I mean, in our chat, I've seen Cliff Kingsbury, I've seen Mike Leach, I've seen Mark Stoops, I'm saying Sonny Dykes. I saw Sonny Dykes. Josh Heupel is one that I've seen from other people, and it's just kind of like, those would all be reactionary hires. Take your time. That's the key for Oklahoma. You got to make this right, because you're about to jump in the SEC in 2 years. And if you make this, let me just finish real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you make the wrong move now and you make the wrong hire going into the SEC, you will plummet, and your program will go back to Gary Gibbs, Jeff Blake days.
Right.
That's why this hire is so important.
And they're starting from scratch. I mean, they were not anticipating having to hire a coach right now. So
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah.
and look, we always talk about the AD having like a list of names
What?
in the
And I bet
in
you
the
this
desk
AD
or
did
whatever.
with as many times as Lincoln Riley's flirted with the NFL. I'll bet you he's got a list of names.
Sure, but it just got serious. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because there are other big jobs open, or at least there were
Right.
before today.
Well,
And
LSU's still open,
yeah,
right? There's
right,
going to
right.
be some NFL jobs coming open
Oh yeah, always
that are
are.
going to
There's
be
about a third
attractive
of the
to
jobs that
people.
are usually open in the
Yeah.
NFL. And so there's going to be competition. So it's not like you can just sit back and wait for the dust to settle and then go pick who you want. I mean, you have
Right.
to. This has to be a very smart, very deliberate process. If I'm Oklahoma, because
Right.
in my opinion, Oklahoma is the best job that's open right now.
I would agree with that. I would
So
agree with that because
you
we're
take
talking
your time.
LSU. We're talking. I would even argue if Lincoln Riley went to the NFL, USC was still open, Florida was still open. I'd say Oklahoma's the best job in their current situation. I don't think Oklahoma's the best job available at once they make it to the SEC. That's
Fair
the
enough.
one thing that I'll say is I don't, and that's what I think changes this whole dynamic. If Oklahoma was staying in the Big 12, that would be the best job available right now, in my opinion. Especially with the Big 12 getting better. I mean, Mike Gundy's doing a good job. Dave Aranda's doing a really good job. He's making Baylor better. I mean, your league was to me, the league was ascending. And I think that once you take Oklahoma and Texas out, it's going to quickly become an irrelevant league. And I don't think Oklahoma is going to be prepared to thrive in the SEC without Lincoln Riley if they don't make the right hire.
And that's why they have to take their time with this. I mean, because
Yeah.
whoever it is going to be there when they make the transition to the SEC.
Right.
And so that's going to be super important. Get your success in the Big 12 while you're there to springboard yourself to hopefully for them, success in the SEC. So this is a hugely important hire for them.
And we're going to see internet rumors of every single coach with any sort of remote connection to Oklahoma. So that's why Cliff Kingsbury, because he used to coach at Oklahoma. We're going to see Brent Venables. I just saw someone say.
Somebody said Brian Kelly and Jeff Quinn too. So obviously, I think both were jokes, but still.
They were jokes. We're going
to,
you know, Mike Leach. I'm saying, you know, because Mike Leach coached there. So there's going to be a lot of hires. And so what Oklahoma does next is going to be fascinating. Let's talk about what this means for USC. We said at the beginning, I don't know if they could have come up with a better situation. Now, assuming he stays at least for 4 or 5 years. If he comes and leaves in 2 years for an NFL job, then this doesn't all of a sudden become as enticing, right? It's now you're starting from scratch again. But if he stays, boy, you know, this is a good move for Oklahoma. Now, I'm not someone, or for USC. I'm not someone who believes Lincoln Riley is a phenomenal head coach. I think Lincoln Riley is a phenomenal offensive mind. I don't know if he's necessarily a phenomenal head coach, and we've seen it because his inability to do anything to make the defense better. And they haven't necessarily been great in big games, not just playoff games, but you know, they've gotten beat by Iowa State a couple times. You know, they've had some. You know, he's lost the Red River shootout more than he should have when you consider how. Yes, that's what I called it. It'll always be that. You know, I mean, let's be honest. He should have never lost a game to Oklahoma or Texas in his 5 years. Texas has never been good. And yet Texas has beat him, twice since he's been there, once as OC, once as head coach, right? And, you know, but I think for USC, it's still a very strong hire because he's going to attract, think about the Heisman Trophy candidates coming into the season. Everybody's talking about Bryce Young, DJ, say it, Vince.
Uiagalelei.
Right. You look at all these quarterbacks, and a lot of them are California kids that have left the state, right? West Coast kids that have left the West Coast. I mean, he got Spencer Rattler from Arizona, right? He just got a commitment in the 2023 class from Malachi Nelson, who's from California. And now you look at it and say, well, this is the best chance USC has to keep some of those big-time West Coast quarterbacks in state, because now USC just became a super attractive job or place if you're a big-time quarterback.
No, absolutely.
Now, the question's going to be how many of the kids from Oklahoma follow him, which is much. This is going to be the first
Real easy to do.
offseason of coaching carousels with an open transfer market. That's going to be fascinating. Does he take Caleb Williams with him, or does he say, I'm going to go with Jackson Dart and try to flip Malachi Nelson from Oklahoma?
Mm-hmm.
Because Malachi Nelson was down to USC and Oklahoma.
Yeah, that'd be an easy flip. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah. So that's going to be the interesting thing for me is this is going to have a big impact in recruiting, and it's going to impact the Pac-12 a ton. Now, what does Oregon do in response, right? What does UCLA do in response? I mean, it's going to have a ripple effect of, okay, you got to figure something out now, and that's going to be interesting to see how the Pac-12 handles that. Because, again, I don't think that Lincoln Riley is a great coach. I think he's a really good head coach but a great offensive mind. Is that fair,
Well,
Vince?
and I think somebody in the chat mentioned something that I think is important to think about. Can he rebuild? Because he inherited a heck of a program from Bob Stoops at Oklahoma.
Yeah, they were a playoff team 2 years before he became the head coach.
Right.
They went 12-2 the year before he became the head coach.
Which is why we were all surprised that Bob Stoops stepped down when he did. And, can he – because, look, USC is a rebuild from the bottom up. And yes, you can do that with recruits. You can do that with the transfer portal. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can do it now. And I think it's probably easier now. It'll take less time now than it would have 10 years ago. But it's still the question is still out there. Can he rebuild a program? Okay. We know that he can take a program that's already good and keep them good, right? And keep them in the conversation, but can he build? And having the brand of USC is obviously going to be important. There's no question. He is situated in a great place geographically. That's important. You're muted, by the way. I'm not sure what you just said.
I said because we know at Oklahoma he knows how to sell branding.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
He did a good job there.
No question. So we know he's a good recruiter. Okay. It's number one, can he rebuild things? And number two, can he hire somebody that's going to put together a good defense? Because if he can't, they're going to be Washington State, right? They're
just going to be Oklahoma of the Pac-12. They're going to dominate the Pac-12, get to the postseason, and lose again.
Yeah, exactly. That's not good enough. Right? I mean, maybe it's good enough for USC fans. I don't know, but I highly doubt it.
It'll be good enough for them the first couple times. But then like Oklahoma fans, it's like, we're Oklahoma. Why are we always getting beat? Yeah. Very similar things that Notre Dame fans say is like, hey, you're Notre Dame. You shouldn't just be happy getting there and getting pounded.
Right.
Because if you think Notre Dame's had bad playoff appearances, go back and look at what Oklahoma's last playoff appearance against LSU.
Well,
that was embarrassing.
Yeah, no doubt.
Absolutely. So it's that part's going to be interesting. So let's talk a little bit, Vince, about what this means for Notre Dame, because I think this is a fascinating piece, and we're going to get into we have a lot of questions about the recruiting piece, and we'll talk about that here. But in some ways, and this might be an unpopular opinion, in some ways, I think this is really good for Notre Dame as long as Notre Dame can continue growing as a program. This is going to put a lot of pressure on Brian Kelly to make sure he makes some really good offseason decisions, meaning you need to make some changes at a couple spots, right? You've got to really rethink your West Coast recruiting staff. Who do I have going out west and battling with Lincoln Riley and whoever he's going to hire?
Sure.
Do you really think it's just Brian Poley and Dale Alexander's your answer? Is that really what you think you're going to be able to go out west and battle with them for? I don't think so. So that's going to be an interesting conversation to have. And now also football-wise, you're going to have to, USC is going to be more serious now. They're going to be a threat now. I mean, Notre Dame hasn't exactly pounded USC the last 3 times they've played. Let's be honest. When you look at this year, they beat them convincingly, but USC was charging back, and this was a bad USC team you beat by 15.
Sure.
In 2019, Notre Dame played them at home. That was a game Notre Dame led early, and USC charged all the way back. Notre Dame won by a touchdown. 2018, that was a 5-7 USC team that was leading Notre Dame for about half the game. Notre Dame ended up pulling away late. They needed that late wheel route to Tony Jones to win that one. And then, of course, in 2017, Notre Dame pounded them. that was actually the only good USC team that Notre Dame faced during that stretch,
True.
which is kind of interesting. So you look at it and say, USC is going to be a threat now and a challenge now. And I think moving forward, that's good for Notre Dame because, number one, it forces Brian Kelly, if Lincoln Riley does at USC what you and I think he's going to do at USC, Brian Kelly just can't get by on beating mediocre USC and Stanford teams every year, which is pretty much what they've done the last 5 years. They've played since 2016 to now, they've played 2 good USC teams. They pounded one of them and got pounded by the other in 2016. The last 3 USC teams have not been good. And it's not a coincidence that Notre Dame's ascendant started as USC and Stanford went down. That's not the only reason Notre Dame went up, but it was part of it that allowed Notre Dame to ascend quicker, and it really hurt USC and Stanford. Well, now USC is going to be good, which means you now have a program that you have to measure yourself against on your schedule every year.
Yeah.
If you handle that correctly, that's a good thing for you as a program.
Yep.
Because you get exposed. If you have holes, they get exposed before you get on the big stage and get whooped, right? And number 2, when Notre Dame beats USC, we're not going to be having these conversations about, well, who did Notre Dame beat?
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And that helps Notre Dame. I mean, right now we're praying for Wisconsin to beat Minnesota so that Notre Dame can have a win over a 9-3 Wisconsin team, and we're praying that Purdue can jump into the top 25 at 8-4.
Right.
If you have a USC team on your schedule, that is what USC is supposed to be, and you beat them, Notre Dame's now got a top 10 win or a top 15 win.
Well, and if everybody thinks that USC is going to be so good so fast, okay, let's go with the hypothetical that Lincoln Riley goes in, gets an amazing recruiting class, pulls in all these, transfer portal guys, whatever, right? And he's ready to roll in 2022. Well, it's not going to be a problem on Notre Dame's schedule next year as far as strength of schedule is concerned, because you got at Ohio State, you got Clemson, and then you got USC.
Right.
So you're going to have 3, and let's pretend that Notre Dame wins all 3 of those games, or maybe loses one of them close, or whatever. Well,
let's say they go 2-1 with a competitive
strength of
loss.
Schedule for that schedule is going to be off the charts. And the fact that Notre Dame doesn't play FCS teams and all of those different conversations that we've had a million times, that will not be a conversation that will ever come up from the talking heads because they can't. Right. So look, I don't ever want to lose to USC. I don't ever want to lose to them. But I can tell you right now, some of the best games I've been to have been Notre Dame USC. I mean, those are just, that's a heated rivalry. It's great. When the other team is good, it makes you better. And I love the fact that you brought that up, because it's a great measuring tool, and it will force decisions to be made, in my opinion, because you have to keep up with them. Because if you don't, what are you going to do?
Right.
Because that's an easy recruiting tactic against Notre Dame. Well, they can't beat USC, so why would you leave California to go to Notre Dame? Come be a Trojan, wear those ugly colors. That's the recruiting pitch. So it works, right? So you have to up your game, man. If anybody's played a sport and you've got a rival, and it's I bet they're pumping iron right now, so I better get into the gym and pump some iron. You know what I mean? It just makes you better.
Well, I mean, anyone that grew up in the 80s with Magic and Bird has heard that story a million times. Magic's like, I got to shoot 10,000 jump shots a day because Larry Bird's shooting 10,000 jump shots. And Larry Bird's saying the same thing. I got to go out and put in this work because I know Magic's putting in this work.
Right.
And that's what rivalries do. I mean, it makes you better. And Notre Dame hasn't had that in 5 years. Because USC just hasn't been that program really since 2017. And Stanford hasn't been that program. And Navy's Navy, right? And so I think in that regards, this is good for Notre Dame. The other thing is people say, well, the West Coast, Notre Dame's just going to get killed on the West Coast now. Not if you make the right hires, because let's not forget, Notre Dame still went out in the West Coast and got big-time players in the 2000s when Pete Carroll was winning championships.
Right.
I mean, where'd Jimmy Clausen come from? Sear Wood. I can't believe I'm having a rough day with my memory, right? Derek Landry.
1,000 times
Derek Landry, who they got out there from De La Salle during a time when USC was a big-time program. Chris Fromm. I mean, the list is long of West Coast kids Notre Dame got. Notre Dame's always going to be able to get some West Coast kids, but you can look at Notre Dame's roster right now, and there will be West Coast kids that you're like, I don't know if they get him if USC's legit. right now, one of the questions we have, let's go some super chats, Vince, because we have a lot of super chats guys asking this very question. It's gonna be 1 second. Kay Grant with the super chat. Thank you, Kay Grant. A lot of CJ Williams talk in the chat. Can you speak on it? I'm going to, but I want to get all the CJ Williams stuff out now. Jesse Ferguson, thank you for your super chat. A bit concerned that Riley to USC could help sway CJ Williams. I know USC has been recruiting him hard and seems to be keeping his options open. Got a couple more. By the way, Mike Nolan, thank you for your super chat, Mike. I appreciate that very, very much. And then I believe we had another CJ Williams one down here that we'll get to. Nope, that is it. So we'll get to the other. The other one was not a link, a one there. So we'll Corey D, we see yours. We'll get to that here in a second.
Okay, cool.
So when you look at the when you look at the CJ Williams one, Vince, it's like, yeah, this is one that's probably going to hurt you, right? I mean, CJ Williams is talking about visiting USC and
he was
UCLA.
already looking. He was already looking
when they didn't have a head coach,
right.
And they were going in the midst of 4-7 now.
Terrible.
You just hired Lincoln Riley in a system that's going to for 4,000 yards a year and actually be good. Yeah, I mean, that was a kid that to me was looking for a reason to stay out west. I don't think Notre Dame, the position coach, has done a great job of making sure you stay all over him and keep convincing him of what's going on. I mean, yeah, I can understand why he'd be looking around with the circumstance we've seen. You know, Notre Dame talking about taking a grad transfer receiver. Why would you do that before signing day? Right. Why would you do that, period, number one, with everybody you could? I mean, wait till you see if Austin and Lindsey and Davis are coming back first before you start worrying about transfer receivers. Right. But there's just been a typical dropped ball situations out on, with receivers out there. So, yeah, I at this point in time now, this is not necessarily intel that I'm giving you. This is what I've heard. And before Lincoln Riley was hired and deducing what that's probably going to mean, I don't know if that's going to go over well. It's going to end up very well for Notre Dame when it comes to the C.J. Williams recruitment because, as you said, Vince, he was already looking at USC before they hired Lincoln Riley.
Right. Yep, so, that's exactly right. And now it's just like it feels to me, because I wasn't overly worried about him taking visits. Okay, whatever. It didn't look good, but Notre Dame is, in theory, they're all the coaches are out on the West Coast. They're making in-home visits, blah, 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 blah. They could go there, they could solidify it, make it happen. This Lincoln Riley thing just feels like the tipping point, right? It's the straw that broke the camel's back. And if he's looking for a reason, now he's got it. And it would have been so much better if USC would have hired a defensive-oriented person to be the head coach, but they didn't. They hired a guy that wants to throw the ball 4,000 yards a game, a season. And if you're a receiver, why would you not want to play in that offense? So,
right.
I mean, I get it. I don't have to like it, but I get it. You know what I mean? And, it's not a good look for Notre Dame. It's not a great situation for Notre Dame. But you know what, though? If Brian Kelly's the fighter and he's the head coach that we hope that he is on the recruiting trail, you better not go down without a fight, man. Like, right. I'm pitching a tent on his front lawn if I have to. And I'm showing him that I'm all in for him.
You just went full Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, seriously. Like, there's no shame in the game, man. Like, you do what you need to do to get him from red to blue and gold, and not the crimson and whatever else colors that they have over in Southern Cal. Like, you need to do what you need to do to get him signed, period. Because it's super easy for him to leave, too, once he's signed. So you've got to put the effort in. And you know what? If you lose, but you put the effort in, then you know what? He didn't want to come anyway, and it is what it is. But, man, don't just like, well, I guess we don't get him. I guess we got to move on to somebody else. Like, that's going to just make me very upset.
What's going to get interesting is there's a few West Coast kids that I'm now – Notre Dame needs – look, this is – I'm talking to you as a coach now, not someone who's got intel specific to these kids, because the guy just got hired an hour ago, right? There is no intel at this point in time. There's speculation. But here's how a coach needs to handle this. This is how Brian Kelly, he needs to be on Zoom like right now, this whole staff. Okay, what's our plan for all of our West Coast kids? And what's all of our plans for every kid that had an Oklahoma offer?
Yep.
right? Well, Tyson Ford, I'm not too worried about it. But okay, so you look at USC, they have 7 position players committed in their 2022 class right now. 7. 8 total, 1's a kicker. 7 position players. Lincoln Riley's in a situation where, number one, he can take a lot of grad transfers, but he's also going to have a lot of room to just take recruits and not have to worry about filling up or replacing kids that were already in the class. He only had 7 kids. So he can just kind of go out and try to flip as many kids as he can. And however he doesn't get by December signing day, he can then start looking at transfers.
They have 7
recruits? Position players, 8 recruits. One of them's a kicker. 7 position players committed, and 2 receivers, an offensive lineman, a defensive end, and 3 defensive backs. Now their defensive back class is pretty good. They got Fabian Ross, who's a safety from Las Vegas. Jaden Gould, if you remember, is a corner from New Jersey, who Notre Dame was looking at, and then Ephesians Prysock, who is from Bishop Almani in California. He's a teammate of Junior Tuihalamaka. So I'm looking out there. So, okay, we need to make sure that we're in front of Tobias Merriweather. We need to be CJ Williams. We need to be talking to Jadarian Price, who had a USC offer. We need to be talking to Jaden Mickey. We need to be talking to Benjamin Morrison. Like those 5 kids, and Junior Tuihalamaka. Those 6 kids need to become major priorities about where do they stand and reminding them about why they picked Notre Dame. Because if you're Lincoln Riley, I would imagine you're going to just start kind of looking, okay, who on the West Coast can we talk to? Now, he didn't recruit Tobias Merriweather at Oklahoma. That helps. Oklahoma actually was Tobias Merriweather's favorite school, but they didn't recruit him. That helped Notre Dame. USC didn't really recruit him until late, but USC got involved. So I don't know how Tobias is going to handle that. This is just me looking at it from Notre Dame's point of view.
Sure.
I don't know how he's going to handle that. So you preemptively get on him before it becomes an issue, because if you wait until USC reaches out, and if you wait until they start looking and talking and developing that relationship, that's going to be too late. And that's what Notre Dame has to avoid right now. Is don't wait for it to become a problem. Be proactive. The problem is with the receivers coach, he's not a proactive guy. So it all kind of falls on the shoulders of Tommy Rees when it comes to the offense. Well, Tommy Rees is trying to finish this class out. I mean, you know what I mean? And now he's going to have to focus on this. So that part of it, Vince, is going to get super, super interesting for Notre Dame.
Yeah, it is. That they're going to have to hold on to the commits in this class hard. You're going to have to hold on for dear life and get to when is it? December what is the signing day?
I think it's like 19th or something 19th, like that.
Okay.
I'll look it up while you're talking.
Either way, you're going to be holding on to this class for dear life and hoping to get these guys signed and into your class, and then you got to start worrying about the 23s. The 15th.
You basically have 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks.
That's an eternity in this day and age, right? I mean, you've got so much to do. So it's going to be a very interesting next week and a half to 2 weeks for sure. And again, Notre Dame needs to do what they need to do. They don't have a game to prepare for, like some of these other teams have to do. Obviously, Lincoln Riley doesn't have a game to prepare for either. Okay, so he's going to hit the ground running.
Yeah, because he's not going to have anything to do with their game against Cal this weekend, because USC has a game this weekend. But he's not going to. That's right, they do. But he's not going to take over and coach a team up for a game next week, and they're not bowl eligible, right? So
yeah, it doesn't that's a moot point, man. Like I'm moving into the head coach's office and I'm making phone calls, and I'm actually if I'm him, I'm on the road, like they're allowed to be on the road, right? So I'm gassing up the USC jet and I'm going to wherever I need to go, and I'm making in-home visits, man. Hey. Get me some Nike gear. Let's go. I'm out. I'm going to get some recruits. Like that's what he needs to be doing. Because that's what I would do. Hey, I'll take the job. Where do I sign? And where's the jet? Because I got stuff to do. You know what I mean? So that's what I'd be doing.
For Notre Dame, for me, Vince, there's only one kid that I'm calling right now. And that's it. Jake Taylor, offensive lineman from Nevada.
That's right, because he committed to Oklahoma, right?
And you talk to him, you stay on him, because here's the deal: if Bill Bedenbaugh leaves Oklahoma to go with Lincoln Riley, and I have no idea if he's going to, I'm just making the point. because a lot of times when a head coach leaves and he coaches the side of the ball, he normally likes to take as many assistants on that side of the
So it's an
ball with
easier
him as he can.
transition. Yeah,
Right.
of course.
So if he takes Bill Bedenbaugh with him, Jake Taylor becomes very attractive at that point in time. And I don't know if, I mean, you say, I don't know if they have room because they're trying to recruit Billy Stroud. Make room.
Yeah, absolutely. Because didn't Taylor's mom really like Notre Dame? Am I remembering that right, or was that that was somebody else?
That was Zach Rice's mom, I think.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
yeah. But it was
way.
Notre Dame, Alabama, and Oklahoma was his final three. He'd be the one guy like Nicholas Anderson. I mean, you could maybe flip him, but he may just end up going to USC, or he may stay at Oklahoma. I don't love Nicholas Anderson. I don't think flipping him moves the needle at all.
Right.
Gavin Sawchuk's a nice player, but I thought he was slightly better than Jadarian Price when they were juniors. Jadarian has leaped him as seniors. He's better than Gavin Sawchuk. And I don't know if they need a second back, depending on where their current roster is. It's worth the phone call because they're recruiting his younger brother, so why not, right? That's about it for me when it comes to who I would look at from there. That's about it, is those two guys. Your priority right now needs to be making sure that you fend off Lincoln Riley and USC, but also see if there's a couple kids from Oklahoma that you could maybe have some success with. But really the only one for me, Gavin Sawchuk, I'd at least worth the phone call, and then Jake Taylor. Jake Taylor's the big one though for me.
Oh yeah, that would be huge. No, I completely agree. So basically you're fighting a two-front war, right? You're checking on Oklahoma, and then you're also trying to keep your own guys in house. I mean, you got to keep your guys. You have to, because too much. Notre Dame's recruiting class feels like a sieve right now, and that's not good.
Yeah, I wouldn't go there just because I think there's really only two guys that three guys that you may lose. I think where correct me if I'm wrong, Vince, but perhaps it's more of it's just not a strong finish.
Yeah,
you're not going to get Nwankpa. You're not.
They were in place to have a really strong finish, and it didn't occur,
and it's not going to happen.
Yeah,
right.
I agree.
And I wouldn't say it's a sieve. I mean, because that means they're going to lose like 5-6 guys.
You make a good point, because I was confident in the guys that they had in the class, and I was hoping they were going to add 2, maybe 3 more. And they're not adding any more, and it looks like they're going to lose a couple. So it feels
maybe could lose a couple.
It feels like a loss of like 4 or 5. Does that make sense?
Right.
Like that's the emotional feel that I got out of it.
Yeah, I get that. It's just kind of that not a great finish kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't call it a sieve because I mean, first of all, they haven't lost anybody that they wanted to keep. And yeah, but you could. I mean, it could get to that point. But there's 3 guys that may leave. You worry about Amorian Walker, you worry about C.J. Williams, and you worry about Junior Tuihalamaka. Junior said recently that he is locked into Notre Dame.
Yeah.
But again, that was if any of these kids told you a week ago that they're solid to Notre Dame, that's out the window. You start from scratch, basically. Right. I mean, that's how they need to handle this. They need to start from scratch and say, we've got to out-recruit them from now until signing day. Right. Because the odds are, if these kids aren't sure by December 15th, they're going to just wait until February.
Good point.
And that's the concern for Notre Dame.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. It's going to be interesting. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah,
it's going to get real interesting.
Quite a day, Vince. Quite a day of college football. It's. And this one, like I said, this could end up being really good for Notre Dame, or it could end up being the trigger to getting Notre Dame back to kind of where they were before 2017. And it's all going to depend on if Brian Kelly just says, hey, we're fine, we don't need to do anything different. That's going to be a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
If Brian Kelly takes an aggressive, like, okay, you want to hire Lincoln Riley? Okay, cool. Look what I'm going to do. Right. And that's going to determine whether or not he's going to be able to continue this trend. You need to keep pushing hard so that way USC's got even further to go to catch up to
Absolutely. Yes. Raise the bar.
And that doesn't just include football and recruiting. It includes your staff. It includes your facilities, includes everything. He's got to keep pushing the envelope. And that's why I always get nervous when Brian Kelly starts talking about how great of a job he's doing. Because if you think you're doing a great job and you're trying to convince everybody in the world that you've done a phenomenal job this year, it tells me that you're trying to justify not meeting expectations.
Yep.
And that's not what champions do. Champions say, okay, we didn't win a title. It wasn't good enough. We got to figure out what we got to do better. And who's not getting the job done. And sorry, buddy, love you, but we got to move on without you.
Yeah.
So it's going to tell us a lot. And Notre Dame fans may not realize it, but this is a big opportunity and a big moment for Notre Dame to say, okay, how are you going to respond? USC just said, hey, I'll see your Brian Kelly and the success you've had, and I'll raise you Lincoln Riley.
Yeah.
That's basically what they've done. So then what is Brian Kelly's response going to be? And that's what we're going to have to find out.
Yep, absolutely.
We had another super chat here, Vince, from Corey D, that I wanted to get to before we get out of here. Here we go. He says, it is now imperative that Notre Dame hires Marcus Freeman or Bob Stoops in a couple years, someone who will make a splash, need to stay ahead of USC. Do you agree? Vince, you want to go ahead and start off with that one?
Well, I mean, I think Bob Stoops is still a really good coach. I don't know that he's looking to take another job, but him going back and doing Oklahoma on an interim basis is a whole other conversation. It's
very telling.
Yeah, I think so too.
He still has a bit of that itch.
Exactly. That's exactly right. But I still think Marcus Freeman is the guy for Notre Dame at the moment. As I sit here on November 28th, I still think that he's the guy. And I do think that that's one other thing that I would be doing if I'm Jack Swarbrick is I'm calling up Marcus Freeman. And I'm like, look, man, because look, we all talked about the fact that Marcus Freeman's going to want to stay in the Midwest, and, you know, he's a Midwest guy and all these different things. Well, Oklahoma's a little closer to the Midwest than a lot of these other schools, okay? And, you know, I'm not saying that he's going to go.
And I don't think that would be the kind of guy they would look for, at least right away.
And that's fair.
At least right away.
At the same time, just too many big openings for me if I'm Jack Swarbrick. And if I have any intention of keeping Marcus Freeman as the eventual head coach, I'm making a phone call. Okay. Right. And I'm putting that in place. And that's how I feel about it. That's what I would do, because you've got him here. He's got Notre Dame on his chest right now.
Mm-hmm.
Do what you need to do to keep that being the case, because I've seen what I need to see from a recruiting situation and from an on-the-field coaching situation for me, for Vince. Okay. I've seen it. I was a little skeptical at first, but I was going to, give him the year. They're a top 11 defense, I think, right now after the game. Okay. I'm ready to make that call. I'm ready to do that. So,
and they're top 10 amongst Power 5 teams.
Right.
In scoring defense.
You know what? What more do you want in your first year as the defensive coordinator? I realize he inherited some stuff, but he's also making do with some guys playing out of position for what he really wants to do defensively. And he is recruiting for that. Okay. I'm sorry. He's the future face of your program. You've got to make a call. So that's what that's what I would do, because eventually somebody's going to sweeten the pot enough that he will leave if he doesn't have guarantees at Notre Dame.
Agree. I like this comment from Rob that back up the Brinks truck now to keep Freeman. I want to respond to this comment right here from Justin Johnson. Stoops isn't coaching Notre Dame. I don't see Bob Stoops coaching Notre Dame, but it is it's a poorly kept secret.
Yeah.
That if Bob Coach was ever going to come out of coaching, that Notre Dame is one of the jobs he's always coveted. He almost took the job in 2009. That's what a lot of people don't know. Bob Stoops actually verbally agreed to take the Notre Dame job and was like, no, I'm not done yet at Oklahoma. And yeah, I mean, he's a Catholic kid from Northeast Ohio, right? Trust me, there's a strong attraction there. I don't know if Notre Dame would necessarily make that move. I don't know if that is the move to make, unless you just don't think Marcus Freeman is ready, which is, fine. But if the Notre Dame head coaching job opens up in the next 2 years and Bob Stoops is currently not a head coach somewhere, that's absolutely a job he would strongly consider. So again, I don't see it happening because timing is so important when it comes to these coaching hires. But, some NFL teams are like, why couldn't have Oklahoma decided to go the NFL or the SEC a year earlier? Because then maybe we might have Lincoln Riley as our head coach in the NFL, right? there's a lot of teams that hired head coaches last year that are like, man, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
why did this happen earlier?
Yep.
So, yeah. It's going to be interesting, Vince. So that's going to do it for this. Actually, we got Patrick Barnes with a super update on receiver recruiting. Seems like all the receivers that left, we would be recruiting more of them this cycle. There's some guys Notre Dame is in on. None of them are going to fill the void that you would lose if CJ Williams left. They're just
right.
You'll get spin about how this kid's really good and he's a sleeper. And yeah, they flipped him from Wake Forest or somebody like that. And no, he's actually really good, which is like, well, then why didn't you recruit him earlier than now? When you started guys are leaving, you'll get that spin. But I mean, it's if they can't convince CJ to stay in the class, it's going to be a big hit.
It's a huge loss.
It's going to be a big hit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, thank you for that. Super chat. Let's see if we got any more here before we get out of here.
Because we get another show tonight, Brian.
Yes, we do. We will have another show tonight at 8:00. It is going to be our Upon Further Review. We're going to talk a little bit about the Notre Dame Stanford game. Vince is going to give his thoughts about it since he didn't give a chance to do that last night. And then we're going to talk about this wild weekend of college football. And we'll focus more on what happened on the field, how that impacts Notre Dame's playoff resume, what needs to happen sort of next week. We'll talk about that tonight. We'll also talk about that again on Tuesday night after the ranking show. And then we will do a preview later this week. We will preview the championship games, the matchups, and all those type of things, and kind of do our final, okay, what needs to happen this weekend? Because there's a lot of different scenarios that get Notre Dame in the playoff, but the reality is they now need more than just Alabama to lose to Georgia, in my opinion.
Yep.
I think they need more than that. But we'll find out. We'll find out. We'll have a better idea of that Tuesday night if Notre Dame is still ahead of Baylor on Tuesday night, or Oklahoma State. We'll find that out on Tuesday night. But Notre Dame made their last statement last night, and we'll talk about that before we dive into it all. So thanks everybody for joining the show today. We appreciate you all very much. And we will talk to you all at about 8:00. And then, of course, we'll talk to you again tomorrow. So 8:00, so you got about 2.5 hours to relax, take a deep breath, get some dinner, and come back and join us at 8:00. So we'll talk to you again very, very soon.